Welcome to Food for Thought. My name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau from Compassionate Cooks. I founded Compassionate Cooks to empower people to make informed food choices and to debunk myths about vegetarianism and animal rights. You can learn more about who we are and what we do by visiting our website. One of our websites is compassionatecooks.com. From there, you can do all sorts of things. You can check out our cookbooks, our cooking DVD, our Compassion in Action CD, our articles and essays. You can join our message board. You can become a Compassionate Cooks member. You can check out all sorts of recipes and resources. So compassionatecooks.com. So thanks for checking it out, and thank you for being here. Before we do anything else, I would like to thank today's listener sponsor. We have one today, and her name is Rose Lennon. Hi, Rose, who is actually sponsoring today's episode in honor of some of her friends. Here's what Rose wrote to me. Hi, Colleen. It was my friends who alerted me to your podcast, which in turn helped me to transition from a vegetarian diet to a vegan lifestyle. And it has been one of the best decisions of my 21-year life. Your podcast is so encouraging, and I was soon pestering my mom, Jane, to listen to them. My mother was vegan for a little while, about 10 years ago. She's very open to different foods and is known for being a creative whiz in the kitchen. She very rarely follows a recipe. After listening to a few of your podcast episodes, my mom stopped eating animal flesh, and a short time later, she stopped eating animal secretions as well. I quickly got over my annoyance at having to share my soy milk supply. Just kidding. And was delighted to have someone join me on my vegan journey. Now, conversations between my mom and I often contain phrases along the lines of, well, as Colleen says, which is very sweet, Mom has also been keen to pass on your podcast to her friends and the rest of our family. She recently gave a copy of some of your podcasts to my grandmother, her own mother. This month, my mom is flying from our home in Australia to the U.S. to visit her sister in Santa Monica. Both my mom and auntie will be attending the Celebration for Turkeys event at Animal Acre Sanctuary with the special intention of hearing you speak. I am truly jealous, but maybe one day you will come and speak in Australia. Anyway, just wanted to share this little wave of veganism with you, and thank you again for your wonderful, inspiring podcast. Now, I did have the pleasure of meeting Rose's mom and aunt, and they were lovely. It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming out. And then Rose's letter goes on. This sponsorship is a birthday present for my good friends, Edie and Violet. It was Edie and Violet who first put me onto your podcast in July of 2008. I had been vegetarian for about 4.5 years, and I was trying to phase out dairy from my diet. Veganism was something I agreed with and supported, but I was having trouble convincing myself that I could do it. Your podcast was so encouraging and inspiring, providing helpful tips to go vegan and gently reminding me to think of the bigger picture. It's not about me, but about the animals. Of course, it was not long before I went vegan, and I haven't looked back since. I wanted to sponsor today's podcast in honor of my friends for helping me to speak my truth. And not only that, but Rose timed her sponsorship to coincide with Edie and Violet's birthday. Edie and Violet are twins, so they celebrate the same birthday. So happy birthday to Edie and Violet. And thank you so much for spreading the word. And thank you, Rose, for your sponsorship and for receiving the word from Edie and Violet and for passing it along as well. You are doing an incredible job there. Clearly, Australia is going to be completely vegan soon just because of all you out there. So good work. Keep it up. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the sponsors. I've said it before and I will say it again. You provide the support necessary to do this work. That's just the bottom line. And I'm committed to giving you the best information and resources I can. And it takes a lot of time and research and resources to do so. So if you glean anything from this podcast at all, I hope you will consider becoming a sponsor. You can make a one-time contribution or you can become a monthly sponsor, which is just fantastic. So visit compassionatecooks.com, and thank you again for any support you can provide. So, time to get on to the topic of the day, which you have probably figured out by now is feathers and down, something we haven't covered yet, and something that tends to affect almost everybody if you've ever had a blanket or a coat. And we're going to talk about it today. If you remember the Poetry's Plea for Animals episode back a couple years ago now, you may remember my talking about the fact that early animal activism in the United States centered around a campaign against feathers. I'm not sure if I talked about that, but I know I talked about and highly recommended Diane Beer's book, For the Prevention of Cruelty, The History and Legacy of Animal Rights Activism in the United States. And I still recommend it. I highly recommend it. And I know I talked about Carolyn Earl White, who lived from 1833 to 1916, and she's a personal hero of mine. She's the founder of the American Anti-Vivisection Society. And I talked about Henry Berg, who's the founder of the ASPCA and other early animal advocacy pioneers. These dedicated activists focused their attention on the animals harmed and killed for their feathers during a time when plumaged headwear was incredibly popular. And this was around the second half of the 19th century. And I'm not only talking about a few feathers stuck in a hat. I'm talking about veritable nests perched on top of a woman's head, including lots of feathers, including stuffed birds, like right on their hats. And it's something we obviously find quite gaudy today. Plus, we don't wear hats like they did. Unfortunately, feathers in fashion are making quite a comeback now. But they were incredibly popular then. They were very, very fashionable and very trendy. An activist decided to go after this particular issue. Now, to meet the demands, and we're creating the demands as well, and this is straight from Diane's book. Let me read to you what she says. The millinery industry, this is the hat-making industry, killed millions of wild birds, particularly migratory shorebirds. Equally gruesome were the methods used to procure the feathers. During the spring nesting season, when large flocks of birds congregated and their protective instincts kept them stubbornly close to the nest, hundreds of workers would descend on the birds, grab the parents, and tear the wings considered premium from their bodies. The adults would slowly die, which invariably doomed the young to starvation. So a campaign against feathered hats begun, and it's one of the few examples of an issue that cut across divides and appealed to animal activists and conservationists, preservationists, bird watchers, women's club. They all joined forces and vilified this industry and won. Organizations and individuals alike called for a boycott on feathered hats, and as a result, sales plummeted. And there were legislative ripple effects as well between 1886 and the 1920s. And again, this is from Diane's book. 14 states banned plumage sales, and numerous others enacted Audubon laws, which specifically protected song and insectivorous birds. Finally, the campaign reached a huge victory when in 1900, Congress passed the Lacey Act, which restricted the importation of foreign birds and mammals and authorized the USDA to safeguard and reestablish bird populations. So this campaign against feathers was incredibly successful economically, legislatively, ethically, and culturally. Bird watching, admiring and protecting birds became and remains one of the most popular hobbies in the United States. And a once-coveted garment became the symbol of cruelty and selfishness. There was a major cultural shift. And that's what I'm talking about here. When I talk about all of this stuff, I'm talking about major cultural shifts. And I know it's happening, and I know that you're all part of it. So I thought that recalling that successful campaign would be a good place to start with a little bit of hope, to start our discussion today about the use of birds' feathers and down. Now, obviously, you already know that feathers are for birds. Feathers aid in flight, in thermal insulation, waterproofing, and coloration that helps birds communicate with each other and protect them from predators. Now, unfortunately for birds, humans figured out that they might benefit from this most essential and quintessential feature of birds and began exploiting birds for such a purpose. With our uncanny ability to commodify life and to reduce it down to its utilitarian purpose. Now, of course, that's our utilitarian purpose, not that of the actual animals to whom these body parts belong. We started taking feathers from birds to use not only for fashion, as I already described, but also with which to stuff our pillows, our sleeping bags, blankets, mattresses, and winter coats. Now, bird feathers have also been used for making arrows, for decorating fishing lures, and for making quill pens. The word pen itself is derived from the Latin penna, for feather, and hence the French word for pen name, nom de plume, plume referring to feather. Another use people have made of bird feathers is the shuttlecock, that thingy used in badminton, the thing called a birdie. Get it? Even the word shuttlecock reveals its bird origins, cock, referring to the fact that the feathers resemble those of a young male rooster or cockerel. So shuttlecocks, or birdies, tend to be made from goose feathers and leather, but synthetic varieties are widely available. So those are some of the ways that bird feathers are used, though the most common use is as filling for blankets and such. Both feathers and down are used for these purposes. Most commercial products contain a blend of both feathers and down. And the higher proportion of down, the higher the value of the product. So what's the difference? How are they obtained? From what animals might be some of your questions. So let's get started on some of those. First, you've got your feathers, or veined feathers, which cover the exterior of the bird's body. And then you've got your down feathers, which are underneath the veined feathers. Young birds have only down feathers, okay? And not unlike the genuine ignorance surrounding other animal products like the hair we take from sheep and the milk we take from cows, I think some people really believe that the feathers and down used in our coats and blankets are from birds whose feathers just fell off and then were collected by opportunists, right? It sounds like I'm exaggerating, but if you just poke around the internet a bit, you'll see what I mean. You'll find people not only mocking other people's ethical concerns about their feather beds, but you'll also find language that reflects this, referring to the birds who donate their feathers or provide their feathers or give their feathers or their down. It's like the people who talk about cows giving their milk. They're not giving their milk is taken. These feathers are taken in the same way. A lot of this language certainly comes from the industry itself, or from companies that sell these products with feathers and down. And some of it just comes from the general public, who really wants to believe that the animals aren't harmed, so they don't have to feel bad and they don't have to make any changes, and who really believe the companies who tell them what they want to hear. I came across some postings that reflected this deep denial. One of them was very interesting. In a general forum, in response to someone asking about how feathers were obtained, one person wrote, quote, "I know that at Eddie Bauer, at least, they just give the geese little massages, which dislodge the down feathers they then use. I think Land's End does that too. It seems like it would, frankly, be much more economical that way, since you don't have to keep buying new geese." Yeah, that's not how it happens. They're not getting massages. And I'm really amazed. I'm always amazed by how desperately the public wants to see the animal exploitation industries as, a bunch of altruistic philanthropists, right? They're not considering the economics, and they're giving these people an awful lot of credit. This is how embedded this information and this perspective is in our collective consciousness, that we're more apt to distrust the animal advocates than we are the industries that actually benefit greatly financially from the exploitation of animals. I'm really amazed by that, and I think it's really important to consider how deep this goes. And so, as much as we'd like to believe that the animals give freely of their body parts and secretions, it's actually a little more complicated than that. So let's first talk about who the animals are and how their feathers are taken from them. I can assure you, this multi-billion-dollar industry does not thrive on the few feathers that naturally fall off the birds. Now, geese and ducks are the primary victims of the feather and down industries. Chickens and turkeys don't produce down. And I'll give each of them their due. Geese, their own episode, ducks, their own episode. So we'll talk about them again. And we'll also talk about ostriches in their own episodes, just about birds being one of the birds exploited for their beautiful plumes. And in fact, ostriches are also exploited for their flesh, for meat, for leather, and for their eggs. So we'll talk about ostriches in the context of feathers a little later on, but we'll also talk about ostriches in another episode. First, let's talk about geese and ducks, both of whom are used to stuff our blankets and our beds. You will see things like white goose down, white goose feathers, gray goose down, and gray goose feathers on labels. And as I said, this is a very lucrative lucrative business, most of it originating in China, Hungary, and Poland, though more than 25 countries are involved in the production of feathers and down. According to the FAO, the Food and Drug Organization of the United Nations, in 1994, the international trade reached more than 67,000 tons of raw feathers and down, with a total value estimated at approximately $650 million US dollars. China produces 80% of the world's supply of down and feathers, of which 90% are from ducks and 10% from geese. Industry sales hit $1.88 billion US dollars last year in China, according to the China Feather and Down Industrial Association. So you can see how it's just a booming business. About 70% of the down used in the United States comes from China. Next to China, Hungary is the second largest exporter of feathers in the world, exporting about 4,000 tons of feathers a year, according to the Hungarian Feather Product Council, exporting them mainly to Europe, mostly Germany, and the United States, amounting to 40 to 50 million US dollars a year. So just to give you an idea of what this actually means, to fill one blanket, it takes down from 75 geese, from 75 individuals. Hungary raised 4.9 million geese a year on average between 2000 and 2003. That fell to 2.59 million in the last 3 years. And when I say raised, I also mean killed. Hungarian geese are also raised to make foie gras, liver pate. Now, as you've probably figured out, there are two ways to take the feathers off of a bird. One way is while they're still alive, and the second way is after they're killed. In the industry, feathers from live animals are considered better quality and thus have a higher value. Pulling the feathers from live geese is referred to as live plucking or hand harvesting or ripping. That's R-I-P-P-I-N-G. At least they're calling it what it is, ripping. In Hungary, live plucking or ripping is the traditional means of taking the feathers, and the geese are plucked 3 to 4 times a year before they're killed. Up to 5 ounces of feathers and down are pulled from each bird every 6 weeks from the time they're 10 weeks old until they're about 4 years old. And geese, as well as ducks, have a lifespan of 12 to 15 years. As you can imagine, plucking the feathers from a bird causes immense pain and distress for the birds, a fact known even by the industry. There's a website called AgroWeb Hungary, which outlines the steps necessary to prepare and pluck geese for live plucking. One of the guidelines says that, quote, plucking should be done in relaxing conditions because the stress and fear in the animals could make the plucking of feathers more difficult. As the result of stress and fear, the feather becomes more attached to the skin. They specify that feathers can only be plucked from the breast, the belly, the back, and the phylum of the animal. No plucking can be done on the wings, the head, and the neck or the tail. Recently, in early 2009, a Swedish investigative television program went undercover to a geese farm in Hungary. A veterinarian who watched the footage said that it was nothing short of torture for the birds to have their feathers pulled out of them while fully conscious. The video footage revealed screaming birds who were bound so they could not bite or scratch and whose large sores obtained from rough handling were sewn back together with needle and thread on the spot without any anesthetic. Afterwards, you can see them lying on the ground, completely numb from the terror and pain. The most horrible scenario involves those who are unfortunate enough to be used for their feathers as well as to make foie gras, as the same geese who have their feathers and down ripped from them several times are then confined in small frames and force-fed until their livers are enlarged with disease, making foie gras, which means fatty liver. And finally, they're slaughtered, at which point the last of their feathers are machine-plucked. What's more, you have a scenario in which animals and humans alike are exploited. Of course, we've talked about this before, leading to increased suffering for the animals. Workers are paid very poorly, and their pay correlates to the quantity of the feathers they rip. So this system of payment alone contributes to appalling ways in which the geese are handled and ripped. And due to the speed which the workers must achieve to earn a living, feathers are routinely ripped from parts of the body that they're not supposed to, like the wings, the head, and the neck that I mentioned above. So for those who protest, but they don't have to kill the geese to get the feathers, well, yeah, you're right. They don't have to kill them necessarily to get their feathers. They pluck them alive. And then they kill them. So you pick which you want and which you'd prefer. And just as we discussed in the leather is not an innocent byproduct episode, the feathers from live geese are a huge source of income for those in the industry. So if you have a problem with live plucking, but think it's okay to just take the feathers from the geese who will be slaughtered anyway for their flesh, it's not that simple. A large percentage of the profits from geese on the market comes from their feathers. So it's a huge incentive to raise, quote unquote, and kill more geese. And let's not kid ourselves that just because the feathers are pulled off of the birds once they're dead, this is some ideal scenario. It's an unnecessary scenario, and it leads to unnecessary and preventable suffering. All animals raised for their body parts are products of suffering before and when they're killed, including geese and ducks. And by the way, from what I was able to ascertain, to get their feathers and down, ducks are never live plucked. It's only geese who are, and ostriches. We'll talk about that later. But ducks from whom we obtain feathers and down are always killed. So again, we have this scenario that we think that there's just like all these birds kind of hanging around. They drop their feathers, we pick them up, and we stuff them into a blanket. That's not how it works. We are specifically breeding these animals to use them and exploit them and then to kill them. And we take everything we can from them. And that's not nature. People will often say things like, but this is part of the cycle of life. If you can't accept that death is part of the cycle of life, this isn't a natural cycle. A natural cycle of, maybe lions on the plains somewhere in Africa who are taking down a gazelle. They didn't breed the gazelle to kill him. The gazelle is part of the natural cycle of life. That's very different than this artificial industry that exists only to create life, to then just destroy it. So that's just something to think about. It's hard to get exact numbers because geese, ducks, quails, and other birds fall under other poultry in the USDA annual kill reports. But according to the FSIS, this is the Food Safety and Inspection Service, this organization keeps statistics about ducks when they arrive for slaughter, breaks them down according to those that arrive with certain diseases and bruises and tumors, and includes those that are boiled alive. According to the FSIS, about 24 million ducks are killed each year for their flesh. That's not nature, and they're kept in horrific conditions. First and foremost, when you think about ducks and geese, what's the first thing you think of besides the fact that they're birds and they fly? When you think about geese and ducks, think about water, right? The fact that they depend on water for their health and hygiene. So in these situations where they're being raised for their body parts, not only are their natural behaviors thwarted when they are crammed by the thousands into dark sheds with only wire and dirt and feces to stand on, they have only a trickle of water for drinking, which means the ducks can't clean themselves, and disease and filth spread rapidly. And also because of this stress and distress, many ducks and geese neurotically pull out their feathers or the feathers of their inmates, and this can occur in semi-confinement systems as well as total confinement systems. So to prevent this, you may be familiar with this when we talk about the egg-laying industry. The workers cut off the birds' sensitive upper beaks, their bills. And as you know from the debeaking that occurs in the egg-laying industry, bill trimming, as it's called, is performed without painkillers. So they burn off the upper bill by bringing it in contact with a stationary blade on an electric debeaker. It's performed when the duck is hatched. However, bill trimming may still be performed once the ducks are older if the upper bill has partially regrown. Scientists have shown that the duck's bill, including the very tip, is richly supplied with nerves, with sensory receptors. And so this procedure, by the scientist, is considered traumatic and painful to the bird. And many die from infection or starvation after this mutilation. Like other animals in animal factories, ducks and geese are bred to be so large that their legs often become deformed and crippled. When they've grown large enough for slaughter weight, these ducks and geese are thrown into crates. They're transported on trucks for many miles through all extreme weather and to the slaughterhouse. But many die before reaching the slaughterhouse. And despite our desire to romanticize this process even, it ain't a pretty picture. There are various methods of slaughter for ducks and geese who must be killed by hand because they're so large, and because if it's done by machine, here you go, the feathers that are a large part of the profit become torn. So they don't want to hurt the feathers. Just like in the fur industry, they use barbaric methods of slaughter, of first electrocuting the animals anally so that they don't harm the fur. That's where the profit is. So even these animals who are being raised and killed for their meat, and they're going to use their feathers afterwards, the feathers are such a huge part of the profit that is a consideration in terms of how they kill them. So they don't want to tear the feathers by machine, so they kill them by hand, which is very difficult to do. They're very large animals who are fighting for their lives, literally. Some of the industry guidelines for killing include, this is what the industry recommends: hang the duck on a shackle, then cut the throat on the left side at the base of the beak, severing the right jugular vein and carotid artery. Another guideline is starve a duck for at least 6 hours before killing it, but don't restrict water. To kill, cut the duck's throat in the soft spot where the head joins the neck. So this is what the workers are doing by hand. And now these methods are typical for smaller flocks. For larger flocks, electrical stunning may be used. But remember, ducks and geese, like all other birds in food production, are not required by federal law to be stunned before slaughter. But when they are stunned, the question is, how effective is it? To answer this question, I would like to turn to investigations done by Viva. You may have heard of Viva UK and Viva US. Viva stands for Vegetarians International Voice for Animals, viva.org and vivausa.org. This organization, that both the UK and the US arms, conducted investigations at duck farms and documented their findings in a publication called Ducks Out of Water. First, they consulted existing research at Bristol University's Department of Meat Animal Science and found that ducks were less susceptible to ventricular fibrillation, which is stopping of the heartbeat, than either chickens or turkeys. They also determined that the stunning current being used in many slaughterhouses in the UK was insufficiently low, thus failing to render the birds unconscious. According to Viva in the US, poultry plants still cling to the industry myth that a dead animal won't bleed properly. So in the case of chickens, for instance, the stunning current, I think we talked about this in the chicken episode, the stunning current is kept down to about 1/10 of that needed to render the bird unconscious. Viva's report continues. For an effective stun, it's imperative that a bird's head is immersed in an electrically charged water bath. However, ducks are known to swan neck, raise their heads when entering the water bath, thus avoiding full immersion. The Bristol researchers believe that if only the crop and bill are immersed, it will be less effective in disturbing brain function than if the whole head had been immersed. They concluded that incomplete immersion is generally less effective at stunning than whole head immersion. And it's so sad that we have to do this kind of research. This is so sad. Surveys of poultry processing plants in North America show that frequently a proper stun is not achieved. However, even when a proper stun is achieved and the bird is rendered unconscious, it's possible, according to the researchers, that the shock is an intensely painful experience. Any ducks not rendered unconscious by the stun or who regain consciousness will have their throats cut while they're fully conscious, and they will be bled to death while they're fully conscious. After the birds are slaughtered, they're then sent to the scalding tank and then onto a mechanical device that plucks off their feathers. According, again, to the FSIS, in 1998, for example, almost 6,000 ducks were either improperly cut, bled, or even breathing when they were submerged in the scalding water to be defeathered. So That's what's happening to ducks and geese for their flesh and feathers, whether they're raised only for their feathers or for both their flesh and their feathers, or for their livers and flesh and feathers. I mentioned the other birds, or there are other birds. I want to talk specifically about the ostrich, also exploited for their feathers. The ostrich industry is huge in South Africa, where they're exploited for their eggs, for their flesh, to make meat and leather, as well as for their feathers. In fact, ostriches were hunted almost to extinction in the 18th century because of people trying to get their feathers. By the middle of the 19th century, ostrich farming began to spread, and now it's a hugely profitable industry. Though the South African ostrich industry today gets most of its profit, its main profit is from the leather, from the flesh for leather of the ostriches. About 80% of the profits come from leather. Its feather industry currently exports about 350 metric tons of feathers a year. Israeli production is relatively recent, but it's been very successful, unfortunately, and second only to the South African industry. Now, though their wings are not used for flight, ostriches use them mainly in mating displays, to protect their eggs, to provide shade for their chicks, and their feathers serve as insulation, regulating their body temperatures. In other words, the feathers and the wings are meant to remain on the bird. They're not meant to be plucked off to make feather dusters, which is what they're used for. And as with feathers and down from geese and ducks, some ostriches are kept and harvested only for their feathers, some only for their meat, and then incidentally for their feathers, which yield, again, a high profit. Ostrich feather production contributes to 30% of the gross income for ostrich farmers in South Africa, constituting a valuable source of income. So again, kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the leather episode. There's a wonderful organization I recommend. Their website is just full of just really good information backed up with footnotes and resources from all sorts of sources, and I really want to recommend it. It's an organization called Concern for Helping Animals in Israel, and their website is www.chai, Concern for Helping Animals in Israel, -online.org. I'll make sure this is on my links page as well, if you didn't catch that. And I'll make sure I put it on the message board too. This is taken directly from their website, and you can see all of the footnotes and references for this. But this is taken directly from the website. To harvest their feathers, birds are plucked and wing feathers are clipped. Blood vessels and nerves run through the center of the feather from the walls of the follicle root, where there are sensory fibers and nerves. Cutting can cause extreme pain and hemorrhaging, and feathers and plumes are also plucked and pulled out with pliers. Pulling out the quills increases the value of the hide, since the torn follicle creates the distinctive scarred skin pattern. I don't know if you've ever seen ostrich leather, but there's a very distinctive skin pattern, and that's why they would pull out the quills this way. It increases the value. The industry claims this is painless, but studies on ostriches reveal that this procedure is in fact quite traumatic, and the birds develop marked avoidance behaviors and learned helplessness. The birds resist this painful process, so they're usually hooded with a bag-like cover over their head and forced into a confining plucking box in order to protect workers from being kicked. And New Zealand has prohibited live plucking of ostriches, although it does permit the cutting of the feathers. In the wild, ostriches live for about 75 years. Ostriches farmed for meat, leather, and feathers are slaughtered at 12 to 14 months. So they enjoy just a fraction of their normal lifespan. Their natural habitat is the open plains of Africa, where they can run at speeds of up to 40 miles per hour. Farmed ostriches are kept in pens of quarter to a half an acre per pair, and in North America, they may be kept in truly intensive conditions, i.e. the indoors. So that's what we got when we talk about ostriches, and these feathers are used for really essential items like boas, those elaborate feather-laden wraps, and feather dusters. You can see why this is a real necessity to pluck and kill ostriches. I'm being sarcastic, of course, but that's the whole point I'm trying to make, is that none of this is necessary. There are plenty of cruelty-free blankets and coats and sleeping bags. And if you really need a boa, there are cruelty-free versions of those too. We have several down-free comforters. We have gotten several from a website called The Company Store, thecompanystore.com, and we love them. If you look on this website under Down Alternative, you'll see their selection of Primaloft. That's their trademarked name for the down alternatives, and down free comforters you'll see on their website in every color and every size. And here's the thing, they're marketing these down-free comforters. They're not marketing them as like cruelty-free. That's not the market they're going for, but they're marketing them as hypoallergenic. So that's the icing on the cake. Not only do the cruelty-free versions not cause immense pain and suffering and death for millions of animals, they're better for people. They're hypoallergenic. And there's even more. The sprinkles on the cake, they're substantially less expensive than the down versions. And what's more, they're easier to clean. We just throw ours in the washing machine and the dryer, and voila, they're completely clean. You don't have to get special cleaner and send it to a dry cleaner or whatever people do with their down comforters. So check out the Company Store. I've seen other companies market their own down-free versions. Just do a search around the internet. I've seen, hypoallergenic down alternatives marketed by other companies. I've seen Micromax and Nature's Touch and Sensuel and Thinsulate, all these names for the down-free alternative. So just poke around a little bit to find one that you like. And here's the thing also about down being used in sleeping bags or coats for insulation. Once wet, the thermal properties of down are virtually eliminated, making it a worse insulator than equally wet synthetic fills. Now, to make up for this, sleeping bags insulated with down, the people will be like, oh my God, but it's so warm and I love my down sleeping bag. Well, it also requires the use of synthetic material to provide insulation and warmth, because once it gets wet, it's just completely useless. So again, it's just unnecessary. So there's that. And that goes for coats too. Coats made with down are not waterproof. Whereas if you get a jacket made without down, you have the advantage of good insulation like Gore-Tex, and it's waterproof. It's also worth saying that Viva had a whole campaign against feathers and down back a few years ago. And because of pressure from activists and consumers, they were successful in getting Pier 1 imports to stop using duck feathers in their pillows, which is so fantastic. They put out this press release and said Pier 1 has made a strategic business decision to carry only fiber-filled pillows and therefore will no longer carry feather-filled pillows in the future. And this was the result of pressure from consumers. Do not underestimate the power of consumer influence. Contact companies who use down and feathers, ask them to use cruelty-free versions, give them information, give them a copy of this episode, but do what you can to help companies replace cruelty with compassion. I never waste an opportunity to educate someone I'm talking to. Even if it's just a customer service representative. I have called the Company Store before and spoken to customer service representatives, and I'll start talking about the Primaloft and how I love the Primaloft. These are people who work for the companies that sell down, and however it came up, I make it come up. I've told them, that, oh no, it's wonderful. The down alternative doesn't contribute to cruelty. And invariably they'll say, well, what do you mean? The down, don't the feathers just fall off? And I know, kind of give them some information. And I've spoken to many representatives who are shocked and stunned, and they're working for these companies. So never waste an opportunity to raise awareness and spread the word of compassion. Speaking of cruelty-free versions and compassionate clothing and accessories, I've been wanting to tell you about another company. This would have been perfect for our Leather is Not an Innocent Byproduct episode, but I figured this was as good a place as any since we're already talking about cruelty-free clothing, accessories, materials. I don't know if you've heard about a company named Truth. I love the name Truth. Truth is a Toronto company started by Renia Pruchnicki. I hope I am not killing your name there, Renia. Renia Pruchnicki, who started making cruelty-free non-leather belts back in 2001. She had a design background. She knew a lot about various materials, and she started making all different kinds of belts that she sewed herself, which is amazing to me because I can't sew a button onto a piece of clothing. So she started making all of these unique belts out of materials such as elastic and cotton and hemp and polyester and blended fabrics. And so she started selling them to stores in Toronto. And then she started designing belts that looked like leather, but were not. And these belts were received not only by these stores, but also certainly by the vegan community. So you may have seen her belts in, places like Moo Shoes and Cosmos Vegan Shop and lots of different vegan and vegetarian stores. And Truth belts have expanded to Japan and Australia and Germany. What I love, besides the fact that these are cruelty-free accessories, is I love that the back of each non-leather belt is proudly stamped with genuine non-leather. Because, if you turn any belt around, you'll see that they say genuine leather, and that always bothers me because they are taking pride in the use of their animal parts. So Truth belts all say genuine non-leather. And so their product line has recently expanded to bamboo t-shirts, wrist cuffs, and necklaces, and you can check them all out at vegetarianbelts.com. We have their belts. My husband uses Truth belts. We've been using them for years. I love the Truth belts, and they come in, there's dressy belts. So my husband's use them, when he doesn't ever wear a suit for work, but when we go to a wedding or something, we've got the kind of more dressy belt. So do I. And then also the casual belts and some funky belts. There's some really fun belts. There are belts for men and women and children. And so check it out. Truth belts at vegetarianbelts.com. And for members, Truth Belts is offering a discount on their belts and other products at their store. So you can become a member, a Compassionate Cooks member, and go to compassionatecooks.com to join. It's really beneficial to join. People are just loving it. You get 50 recipes right off the bat. I sound like I'm selling something here. I am, but I want you to be part of the club. And we're giving all this back to you. You get 50 recipes whose value is $50, which is the cost of the membership. So you're getting it back immediately. You get your own special newsletter. You get discounts on all Compassionate Cooks items, and you get discounts on all of these fabulous companies that we're partnering with so that you can continue to learn about and support all these wonderful compassionate companies. So become a member. You'll receive an email telling you about the discount and how to obtain it. If you are already a member, you'll definitely hear about it in an email and in the next newsletter, your own special newsletter. So vegetarianbelts.com. So that's all I got. There's so much we can do to help animals without even doing more than just considering our purchasing options, recognizing that there is no dearth of cruelty-free clothing, accessory, fashion, utilitarian options. There's just no dearth of these options, and we're all the better for it. Remember the beginning of this episode when I talked about the campaign against feathered hats, literally creating a cultural shift in how people saw birds' feathers used for fashion. I strongly believe that only when we shift how we think about animals can we truly change how we live with them as fellow earthlings and how we treat them. Only when we change our perception about animals can we live peacefully among them. Here's to taking action, to speaking up, speaking out, and living a life consistent with our values of compassion, kindness, and empathy. Here's to the animals themselves and to the joy and peace that comes from a life lived simply so that others may simply live. For the animals, this is Colleen with Compassionate Cooks. Thanks for listening.